Welcome everybody to our tutorial, Getting Most Out of Your Sensors. My name is Professor Katarzyna. I'm leading Qualitative Lab Technologies Lab at the University of Geneva and Copenhagen. And together with me, we have Alexandre de Masi, our brilliant PhD student. So what we're going to learn today is particularly a mixed methods approach, because as many of you know, the quantitative aspects of our data sources, including wearables, which we use a lot in our lab, as well as smartphone, which we're going to learn also. It's very, very powerful data source. We also have our study participants, which opinions and attitudes may very much influence not only how our sensors are being used, but also how should we interpret the data at the end. So over the 10 years right now, we have tried and we keep trying to collect these different data sources to model behaviors, health state, and quality of life of different individuals, different age, genders, conditions, and also for a different purpose. So what we're learning is that there is a more and more importance of qualitative methods. And that's what, if you remember only one thing out of this tutorial, is the importance of qualitative methods in your work. And I'm looking forward to discuss it with you at the question and answer session at the end. So now, Alex, the floor is yours. Let's enjoy. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Alexandre de Masi. I'm a PhD student at the University of Geneva in Switzerland. And today I'm going to present the methodology that we use at our lab, Quality of Life lab, which is based between the University of Geneva and the University of Copenhagen, and directed by the Professor Katarzyna. So we title this tutorial Getting Most of Your Sensors because we came with this methodology where we integrate qualitative and quantitative research in the same study. Also, most of the study that I'm going to talk about in this tutorial with this type of methodology are for in the wild study, contrary to in the lab. So just a little bit about us, but first the agenda. Quickly, who are we? What is the mQoL-Lab? What is our goal? What is our mission? What are we trying to accomplish? After, I will define what we describe as a in the wild study. What exactly does it mean? I will go after to the mixed methods, where I will show our different type of tools that we use for qualitative and quantitative research. I will present two use cases. One where we were doing research on sleep, and another one where we're doing research on stress. And I will also share with you what we learn from running this methodology for these two studies and what we could have done differently. After, of course, when you run a study with participants, usually, if everything goes right, you end up with data. And I will shortly and briefly explain what we do with the data at our lab, what are the tools that we're using for that. And we will finish with some conclusive remarks. If we have time after this talk and after the question, I hope some of you will still be there on Zoom, we will do a little exercise where I will ask some people, some groups, to work on a human aspect to research, and using this mixed methods, how you will implement it. So firstly, who are we? We have a quality of life lab at the University of Geneva. Our goal is to quantify and enhance quality of life. So the World Health Organization defines quality of life in different domains: physical health, psychological, social relationship, and environment. As you can see, the one which are in full color are the one that we already studied in our lab. via user study, participant study. The last one, for example, that you can see down is the one regarding mobility. We focus on different aspects, and we're trying to using the modern technology to be able to quantify these different aspects, to later reuse this data to enhance it. So this is our goal, but exactly how we're doing that. So first we have our patient or participant in our study. We're asking them to fill some surveys at the beginning and end of the studies. They collect data via Wearable or via sensors, which then after are sent to our platform at the Quality of Life Lab for exploration, modelization, visualization, and later shared via the research group or with other professionals. Maybe professional not of our own domain, maybe because we're computer science, but maybe with people from medical domain, we will be better to explain exactly what is happening in this data. So quickly, if we looked to the different facets that we worked on, we explore already a lot of these facets, so 13 on 24 as defined by the World Health Organization. And two of them that I will present later as use case of this methodology are sleep and stress. With the data that we collected for this exploration of these different facets, we're trying to build computational model to be able later to change behavior or to help people to get in better health condition, to in the end get a better quality of life and be able maybe to live longer or to live in a better condition. Our end goal will be to have a big living lab with a lot of participants that we can observe for a high number of years, so longitudinal studies. So what are we what is exactly the definition of in the wild? So what we are explaining by in the wild, what we want to say, sorry, about in the wild, how are we categorizing, sorry, in the wild study? It's studies which are done outside, so usually they are done in real time, contrary to in lab where it's only a few minutes or maybe a few hours. They are minimally intrusive, so the burden on the user, of the participant, sorry, is quite small. The context and environment is everything. So by that we mean that everything that is happening to the participant is recorded, and even aspects, even events which are outside of the scope of the study, which maybe have importance later in the aspect that we are observing, the human aspect that we are observing at. And of course, big difference with in-lab studies. In-lab studies can be a few days maximum, depending on the aspect that you're looking at. This one in the wild study usually are multiple months and years. But what about our method? So, with our mixed method, which is quantitative and qualitative method, how do we describe it? What exactly does it mean? As you can see, I put two little logos, so one with what we'll say smartwatch, and one with people talking, because it's basically what it is. It's tools which are enabling us to collect sensor data coming from sensors that maybe some of you are building right now, and an approach which is more classical, maybe in the medical world, where you are discussing with the subject of the study. So the first question with X method is, what human aspect are you trying to explore, are you trying to research? What exactly the literature say about this aspect? So it can be seen as a way of exploring domains which are maybe not yours. For example, we are computer scientists at the beginning, but the literature of sleep, for example, will be mostly medical aspect. So of course we can quantify sleep with this wearable, with this what I will show you later. But the medical domain, medical research, has a lot to say about sleep. So we should also focus on what they have to say. So with the quantitative part of the method, usually it's objective data, continuous, recorded automatically. The human is not doing anything for this data to be recorded. The participants do not ask to do anything. They're sensory based and they are in context. And you have the qualitative part of the method, which is subjective, momentary, self-reported by the user, which is of course biased in some way, and also memory of the study participant can be an issue, meaning that each data point that you will collect with qualitative methods has to be really observed and to be sure that you want to include it in your dataset and in your analysis later. When we also asking about the literature, we're also thinking about, okay, for this human aspect, do you think there is a wearable or like a device which is already available for you to collect this specific human aspect, like commercially available? Can you use a Fitbit? Can you use Wearings? If not, can you use a professional grade wearable? I'm thinking of the Empatica E4, for example. If not, what can we do? Do we discuss with partners? For example, maybe some of you, to create our own sensor. Now with the maker movement, we have a fact lab. Can we ask the fact lab for help to do some prototyping, to put one of the sensors of the partner on a wristwatch? Can we collect data that way? In the past, we never use a medical grade device for study because most of the time they're quite big. They're not, most of the time, all of them basically, they're not on battery. And we use them sometimes just to be sure that the wearable data are not garbage, meaning that like we can trust the data which are getting out of the wearable. Also, when you're running a study and you have, I don't know, 50 participants, it's much cost efficient to give all your participants Wearings or Fitbits than to have each one of them get a medical grade device who costs in the thousands. So a little bit more about our method and the tool that we're gonna see today. So one of them is based on smartphone data, the smartphone as a sensor that we have in our lab called mQoL-Lab, which record data on a minute base or hour base, depending on the events which are happening to the phone and to the study participant. After we have also ESM, EMA, which are survey in context, which are able to record data from the participants, from asking him a question, and he can reply in a different kind of way. After we will see the DRM, daily reconstruction method, which enable us to understand a little bit more about the participant day and the aspect that we are looking at. And of course, classical one, interview, final and at the beginning of the study, where we are just trying to assess the participant before we start the study. And of course, during this interview we have surveys, and usually these tools are used at the beginning, at the end of the study. For example, if it's a month, we do it week 1 and at the end of week 4. But if we are doing studies which are years, maybe we'll do this survey interview every 6 months. So one of the first quantitative tools that I'm going to present is the smartphones. Smartphone as a sensor. In the past, we saw in one of our own study that the smartphones are always with us 88% of the time, like daily, which is kind of crazy. We saw it today, like with the new apparition of COVID and how we start to use the smartphones as Bluetooth beacon to be able to track who we've been in contact, trying to stop the chain of passing the virus around. So these are devices with a lot of already integrated sensor, but we can see it on a higher level of abstraction as a sensor itself and what exactly we can learn from what's inside. For example, I will show you right now the data that our own logger that we created at the lab now a few years back and that we're continuously updating is able to collect mQoL-Log, which has collection, I mean a big number of data points that we collected, but the different aspects. For example, as you can see in green on the first line, we are looking at the screen, what exactly is happening on the screen of the device of the study participant, what application is getting used, what is the status of the battery, is it charged, is it discharging, what is the network connection. We can learn a lot about the mobility of someone looking at what network they are connected with, and also to the movement of the participant. So the type of activity that they are doing. Are they on foot, are they still, etc., etc. So smartphones at the base are already a big source of information, which now are getting a little bit more complicated because Google and Apple are now protecting a little bit more their platform, which we are not doing a few years back, to protect the privacy of the user, which is a good thing, but which make researchers like us a little bit more complicated to run big studies where we want to collect this type of data. The other part is also, of course, the wearables. So wearables market has been evolving now in the last 10 years, I think. Yeah, I can say 10 years. Like, first, a lot of companies were creating wearables and were out of the market after 2 or 3 years of existence. We saw it recently with Google buying Fitbit, who bought Fitbit bought Pebble a few years before. So now the market is starting to get a little bit stable, and they collect a lot of information and they get put on a lot of different parts of the body. So we run this analysis on more than 400 wearables a few years back, and to see where people are putting the wearable and how many of them there were, and we can see the trend. So a lot of companies are not staying because they are not able to market their wearable, and they didn't find a client base, and maybe itself for most of the time the wearable were not a good quality, like the sensor inside was not good, or the processing from the data from the sensor was not done well. So the execution of the data collection can be an issue, but ourselves we've been working with a few years back with the Basis Intel, which was a recall device, too bad, but it enabled us to do some interesting studies. We're working also with the Fitbit on big data collection regarding seniors and their physical activity and heart rate, of course, and the Withings HR, which this device also regarding the heart rate data. But so now we saw the data to collect with smartphones and wearables. But what about the qualitative methodology? So it's mostly, I would say talking, but information exchanging between two humans, or a human and a tablet when you're doing that. So with the initial and final interview, where you are discussing with the study participant, which taking more time, of course, than just recording data with the sensor, the ESM and the DRM, and of course, the EMS, and the DRM. Let's go to that. So, qualitative and the qualitative, part with the initial and the final interview. So in initial, of course, is always before the study. We're asking usually questions regarding like what kind of smartphone they have, because the smartphone is going to be the gateway for us to get the data. We want to make sure that they will not have issue with their device. If it's a too old device, will it support our software? All of this technical issue that can arise after. We will, of course, later focus on specific questions regarding their the human aspect that you're trying to research. Meaning, okay, so right now, let's take one of the use cases that we're going to see later. We're working on sleep, sleep quality, sleep assessment. In this initial survey, we're going to start to ask, oh, by the way, what time are you going to bed? What do you have a bed routine? Do you take your shower just before going to bed? You know, all these little questions that enable us to understand better the data that we will get later. This is where also we use the questionnaires, the survey, which were created by other researchers, other domains, so validated scale that were created by the medical community, for example, regarding sleep. This is where we're going to use it and ask people to fill it. We ask them, of course, like classical question, age, education, occupation, all this information. We also ask about like the proximity to the device, because of course the device for the other part of methodology, just to make sure that they're gonna use it, and what we can learn about their usage regarding the smartphone and the wearable, and any other comments. We ask, of course, if they have questions to ourselves about the device, about their data, all of this. And came after the end of the study, of course. After the study, we ask the user to share their experience with us of the study itself. So we use a user burden scale where they have to explain, they have to feel like their burden of the study on their life. What was the impact of it? Because for us, when we are creating the study protocol, maybe we didn't think about every little thing that will impact them, because we have our own experience, we did our own research, we apply the best practices of running a study, but maybe some things were overlooked, and this is where we learn. Yeah, of course, the comments itself about the wearables and what exactly was the impact on their daily life. And one point which is quite interesting is anecdotal stories. So this can be seen as a little bit weird because it's anecdotal data. So you can really, you cannot like put it in a paper and say, oh, we found that. It's not possible. But this can be a starting point for a new study later, or another way of later expand on your topic of research. Because maybe something totally out of the scope of your study was happening and that you didn't really know it, and just by one or two participants in your study telling you, oh, by the way, I learned that, or I did that, or my husband told me that, or my wife told me that. This little thing can be of great importance later. So always keeping in mind that it's there. This other tool that we're using is called ESM-EMA. ESM for Experience Sampling Method and EMA for Ecological Memory Assessment, which are basically surveys, questionnaires in context. Usually they are triggered automatically. They can be like triggered by time or time interval, every day around 8, or context-based, meaning that they will rise so the user can feel it. So usually they're using their smartphone to reply to this ESM-EMA. So they can be context-based, so on the study subject, the participant arrive at work. For that, it's enabled by the sensor data fusion, so we can derive after a few days or after a week. Okay, we know that the study participant is going to work. And we know that it's connecting to this Wi-Fi network. So from that, we know that, okay, the Wi-Fi network name x66, X is the Wi-Fi network at work. So we can derive the mobility of the user and say, okay, we will trigger this question when the participant arrive at work. So we have, in these two screenshots, for example, you can see the first one is from one of our own studies, a study that we run in the past, a few years back now, about the quality of experience on smartphone. So it's quite important to get this data just after an application usage. So meaning when someone finish using an application, for example, for this first one was Maps, we ask directly what exactly, how will you rate your application usage with a scale that is used also in the domain of qualitative experience. And on the second picture that you can see, this is something new 4 years ago now, but using EMA directly on a smartwatch. So basically the phone triggers the EMA, which is sent on the smartwatch, and the study participant can directly select a predefined response. For example, here you can see there is a time of the notification, there is a question, and there is all the response under it. So it's more like a ad hoc diary, but it can miss context. So it's really important to see how you turn the question that you ask. And always look at the validated scales in the domain. And the last part that we're gonna see is the DRM. Sorry. So, the DRM, what does it mean? Their risk conclusion method. So the DRM is based on the last 24 hours or last 48 hours, sorry, depending of when you run it. We saw that in the past, running this type of tool for a study that every day can be a burden for a lot of users. So every 2 days may be better if you're trying to have a long-running study, so multiple months, multiple years even. It's better to run it less, because in the end you will have better data that if the study participant just open the app and I have to fill another one and just dismiss the notification or something like that. So what exactly is inside the DRM? So you can see on the screen right now like a full day of what does it look like. So in this DRM, we were asking to the participant what they are doing, or what was their mobile phone usage during the day. So between 11:30 a.m. and 11:30 p.m. The experience, was there a moment where they felt that their smartphone experience was bad? If so, can they tell us about it? And of course, to finish, we were asking to them their location and context, because we are linking all of this data together. So it was quite difficult because to indicate the approximative time, because people do not really look at the time when they use their phone, as we can imagine, and as we saw in our study in the past. And always tailor the question for the study. They have to be you have to be really clear with the participant. So it's more like a cumulative diary. You may miss context if you're not totally good on the question. So if you're missing some question, it can become an issue later when you will do the coding. And of course, it's memory biased, which happens with the human all the time. One of these aspects is that when you're using this kind of tool for the DRM, it's usually you take this, for example, this timesheet, and you code it, meaning that, for example, this here we have a time series with 3 variables. Each variables has attributes with information in it. The way that you are going to convert this paper data to data to be put after to analysis maybe would be different than someone else, than the PhD student at the lab, for example. So it's important that when you get a DRM of a study participant, that you have multiple people coding this DRM. So each one of the 2 coders code it himself, and after you have the 2 coders discussing together to be sure that they didn't miss an important part of the data, because they know maybe a little better some aspect of, I don't know, an application or an aspect of the context. Maybe this is important, and you have to get it well. Also, yeah, some questions can be difficult to ask to people depending on the type of study that you're doing. So it's quite difficult to do DRM with a topic, with an aspect that you're looking into, which can be difficult to manage. So with the use of all this sensor data coming from smartwatch or from wearables and smartphones, we add a context to reports from the study participants. It becomes more frequent, become quantitative, it becomes subjective. It's with the data from smartphones and wearable, you don't have this bias of the human side. Be careful of the sensor, of course, we will see that later. And also you have the aspect regarding the non-judgmental. Smartwatch will not, wearable will not care really of different aspects of your life. You will just do what you do. It's silicon, so yeah. And this will enable to have context-rich, continuous longitudinal data. So what does it look like in real life? So for us, we implemented these methods in our studies in the past, and we created a platform for that to manage all of this. As you can imagine, there's a lot of coding involved. We use a lot of open source software because they are documented, they are free, and they are little building blocks that you can put all together to create the application that you need. For example, we have an application on smartphone for iOS and Android where we're collecting data and we are sending remote EMA or ESM. We're collecting wearable data, so most of the time for these platforms, Fitbit or Withings, you cannot record the data directly coming from the sensor. For that, you have to request the data from the maker of the wearable, which can be an issue sometimes, but that's the only way that you can get it. Also, when you are collecting data from this wearable, you need to think when you will request all this data from their server that sometimes they do some post-processing on the data. And if you're trying to work on a specific aspect of the human behavior or sleep or stress, etc., the processing of the data maybe will lose the information that you're looking for. So you need to be careful. After you have other devices like the Empatica, which are more like professionally grade, but they're not as ubiquitous than the Fitbit and the Withings. Of course, we put a lot of emphasis on security, so protection of the data, protection of the study participants, and later we have also everything which is related to the data management, to the fact that our platform can be taken from Geneva, put in Stanford to run a study. It can be copy and paste again to another country, to another server. This is really something that we are looking for, to be able to move our platform quite easily or copy paste it to another country. Because depending on the law of the country, depending of what you want to do with data, you have to store the data maybe in the country where you are collecting it. But let's talk about use cases. So concrete cases, let's talk about sleep and stress, which are the two facets that we worked on before. So with the use case of sleep, for example, before I was talking about the initial interview. This is the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, which is used in sleep study since 1989 in sleep studies. So where you are establishing the baseline of your participant. So all of these questions are really important. But what can we learn from Wearable? So we ran this study a few years back with participants in Denmark, in Copenhagen. It was working mother for more than 6 months. We were collecting data regarding their sleep, but also data from smartphones. And from this data, we learn the difference of sleep quality, of the length of their night, and the difference between them. The wearable which were used in this study was the Basis from Intel, which was a really nice device because it was one of the first with a skin temperature sensor, but the device was recalled a few years back, which was a pity because it has good battery life, and so if anyone is making a device like this, please do. The sensor inside were good. So as you can see, we focus on a lot of different aspects. So stress, we're asking questions about the type of bed, was there anything related to alcohol, exercise, the noise, all of these factors can influence your sleep. But what about seniors? Another one that we run on a study on sleep, for more than 6 months. So this one was a little bit more participants, so 75 seniors over 6 months. We're using a Fitbit for this one. And as you can see, there is a pattern in the data. So for each one of these is this graphic, so it's time-based, and you can see on the x-axis. But like the quality of the sleep duration was linked to a seasonality. So you could see that some people were sleeping better or worse depending on the season, which is quite interesting. So this data, was recording with the Basis, and we saw also that like the statistics, the link were different depending, of course, of the participant and the type of sleep that they had. And how we were able to use logistic regression and like between the data collected by the device and the data collected by the other part of the methodology, so ESM or EMA, or asking questions to the participant. So back to the phone. So from the study before with the working mother, we also looked at the data from the smartphones, and we correlated it with the data coming from the watch. And we could see that there was some link between them. So you can see the smartphone as a Alibaba cave. So when you use their sensor on the smartphone, you need really to think outside the box. So just by knowing when the screen is on and off, you could basically establish some sleep pattern for the participant. Because the first thing that they do when they wake up in the morning is look at their phone. Did I get messages? Did I get email? All of this plays, and you can learn from that. Only from the phone. And here we have the validation with the watch, the smartwatch information. Another study that we did on stress with 38 people. We were working to stress assessment by using the smartphone's screen, meaning that the way that we use smartphones are influenced by the stress, our level of stress. So for using different type of touch, so swipe, tap, zoom, and everything like that, there was a link between that and the stress level. We could see also like how the stress were going from morning to evening, the stress per day. As you can imagine, people are less stressed on the weekend, and the stress along the day get lower with the hour passing. We were also able like to classify the stress for all of the different type of movement on the screen phones. And of course we use the screen phones to record the data, the swipes, and also EMA, so to get the data corresponding to what was the participant feeling. As you can see, like the feature and how we rank them, and what was the influence of all of this different kind of application in this for this last table. But now you have the method. I mean, the mixed method. But what about the data? Good question, you will ask. Okay, so for the data, we are following some best practices, which is always have constant monitoring of your data. Always check that they are coming well, and that you will not be after the study finish and saying, oh, damn it, this didn't record, because this happened. Also test the data, how they are coming. You never know when something is gonna be changing. For example, I'm thinking of Google, because usually it's them which are changing something on their Android platform, and you discover that they push an update and you don't have access to this specific sensor variable, or now there is more permission to be requested for this to work. And this can become a big issue if you're running studies which are like 2 or 3 years, like big longitudinal studies with this information, this data are important to you. Another one, which is the classic backup rule, backup rules, rule of 3. Have at least 3 copies of your data, store the copy, at least two different media types, so having a USB key somewhere, or an external drive, and on your laptop, or outside server, or the cloud, or anything. And of course, have a copy of your data off-site, so somewhere which is not easily accessible, to be sure that it will not get destroyed. Always prepare for the worst case scenario, meaning that when we are preparing a study with this mixed method, when you are defining the protocol, always prepare for the worst case scenario. I had to do it myself. One of my last study, I had to change, to pivot, because when I was going to run my study, it was the beginning of the first wave of COVID, and I couldn't run it anymore. So I had to change the way that, I had to change the study. But I could reuse still some part of the software that I developed to run it. Of course, after you have the classic tool to run your data analysis, data pipeline. We are mainly a Jupyter notebook shop ourselves. That way we can have a reproducible analysis. So that way, when we are publishing, we're now trying more and more to have an open data set. We're trying to share the data, and of course we're trying to share the analysis to say, okay, we got this result. You can also rerun our own script, and you will get the same thing that we put in the paper. Something to keep in mind, the KISS methodology. Sometimes a lot of people are pushing directly when they have all this data, so they have this, all the sensor data from Wearable and smartphones, and they think about the EMA, the DRM, ESM, and the initial and final interview data, and they think, oh, but I have labels now. I label a lot of events. So I can go to machine learning, I can put everything in a deep learning neural network or something like that, using deep learning tools, and I will have a working model for predicting when someone goes to sleep. But okay, you can, but sometimes you can also just look at the basic statistics and keep it simple, and you will obtain the same result in a better and faster way with using a lot less computational power. Of course, we're using also oversampling when our datasets are too small for when we are trying to model and we have issue with the size of a dataset, like depending of the imbalance of class, for example, you can imagine. And usually what you end up with this big study using this mixed method is a big time series. So you need to focus on the seasonality of it, forecasting, can you do classification, do you trying to predict using regression, all of this. So now we're coming to the end. I have some conclusive remarks. It's going to be a little bit fast. We have some limitation, of course, because on our own experience, the study that we're able to do the longest with seniors was for 3 years max. So, but you can imagine that after some time, participants are dropping out because, of course, it can become a burden. With limited participants. Until now, in all the study that we run since the beginning of the lab with this mixed methodology. Of course, the methodology evolved from when we started the lab. I mean, when Professor Vac started the lab until now. But we have been learning from the output of each of our study and changing the methodology until the point that what I present to you today. So until now, we got basically around 317 subject study participants in all, like globally aggregated in all the study that we run on the different quality of life facets. So for future works, this tutorial is right now a draft of a methodology paper which will be sent to a journal soon. One of our end goals using this methodology is to have this big longitudinal study to enable predictive health, so quantify quality of life with all this data and be able to predict the health. What can we run from these sensors? Can we detect our disease 1 year in advance using Fitbit? You know, this kind of thing. And for finishing, I will take your question in the Zoom, and if we have time after the Zoom, I would like with you to run a little exercise, a little game. So where you will put this mixed method to work. I will create groups if we are enough, and basically we will each select a human aspect, human behavior, something that you want to study, or even something that your own sensor, because I imagine some of you are designing sensor right now, you're focusing on your research on, and you would like to see it, okay, how can we run in the wild study with this mixed method? And can we validate those sensor findings, something like that, and and we will do that all together in Zoom. And for that, what will we start with is so define the use case, what human aspect you would like to study, define the data that we will collect from the smartphones, from the wearable. And of course, define the content of the interview, the ESM-EMA, and the DRM. Thank you for following this tutorial, and time for question. And if you have time after, time for exercise. Thank you.